We in fact painted it and have it finished so that you will have a perception looking at it now as to how that final project will be done. As I've said in the past, the only thing left for us to do now is the interior, and that is what we have had the delays on, and we hope to be moving forward on that very shortly. On the airport, I'm told that the renderings are being completed, and it is my anticipation that for the next set of consultations commencing in March, that we should have renderings available. Those will be put out widely to the media and also will be on the NIA website so that persons can look. You asked for an end date for both projects. I don't want to hazard an end date at this point. Let me get them started, and then once we can do that, we can talk about an end date. But the anticipation currently is that our hospital should restart this year, and the airport should also start this year. I think once we can get that done, then we can talk about what the anticipated end date of those projects is going to be. The pension scheme for any workers, you asked about private companies. I have no control, naturally, over what private companies do. I encourage them, of course, to pay their workers well and to put in place the necessary protections for their workers. I think that it will be a matter for the government to consider whether legislatively you can force private companies to put in place some type of pension scheme. You mentioned pension, but some of them also do not have adequate health coverage, insurance for their workers. So both will need to be looked at. So I think you raise a very important point, and it is a matter that I think we need to look at carefully. I am meeting with the Chamber of Commerce at their quarterly conference in Nevis shortly, very shortly, I think in another week or two. And I will certainly raise this with them because I think you've raised an important point. You talk about foreign policy. As you said, I was a former foreign minister, and so those questions are perhaps better directed at the current dispensation in Bastille, the current foreign ministry. And we know that Dr. Denzil Douglas, who was prime minister for 20 years and a seasoned diplomat and politician, that he's now the foreign minister. I share your view, Mr. Hanley. I believe that the future of the Caribbean lies with Africa. And I've said so for some time, that we ought, for all the reasons that you have said, seek to have a closer relationship with Africa. If my colleagues in the cabinet that I served in at Team Unity are truthful, they will say that I was always a very strong advocate for directing our attention south and engaging what I refer to as South-South cooperation. And we need to animate that relationship with Africa. You said that you were disappointed in me that I had not been to Africa, but that is not actually true, because I signed diplomatic relations with Senegal in Dakar, and I would have traveled also to Morocco in Africa. I admit that I did not go to as many African countries as I would have liked, but I certainly would have gone to Morocco and engaged at very high-level diplomatic discussions in Morocco, and I would have gone to Senegal, where I signed with their foreign minister at the time diplomatic relations in Dakar. In fact, I was very pleased in Senegal to have been accompanied by Eustace Theo Wallace from right here in Nevis, who speaks French. And that was helpful for me because I don't speak French, so he was able to translate. So I just want to correct that I have in fact visited the continent, although I would admit that perhaps not as often and not as many places as I would have liked to. During my tenure as foreign minister, because I'm going to wrap that now into your visa question as well, I thought that there was an intrinsic value in pursuing visa waiver arrangements with the rest of the world. And I know there were times when we announced these visa waiver agreements that members of the public scoffed. Many of them said, well, nobody wants to go there. But that was never the point. The point is that we wanted the St. Kitts and Nevis passport to be the most powerful passport of its kind in our region, the Caribbean and Latin America. In the Caribbean, we had, through the efforts of the foreign ministry during my tenure, drawn level with the Bahamas and were exceeded only by Barbados. I gather that we are falling behind now because for whatever reason, I'm not sure, we have not carried on with that momentum that we had. The only country that I gather we have signed visa waiver arrangements with in the last 2 years now has been Zimbabwe, I'm told. And I gather that the Saudi Arabian government has granted us a special arrangement where we become only the 4th country in this hemisphere that can access the Saudi visa online. So they've allowed us an online entry to Saudi Arabia. Only Panama, Canada, and the United States have that privilege. St. Nevis becomes a 4th. So that is a significant development in my view that this government, new government, has achieved. That is the federal government and Dr. Douglas. Of course, a lot of hard work over the years has resulted in us regaining a qualified visa waiver with Canada as well. And that would have come, again, under Dr. Douglas's tenure. I did say to my friends in Canada jokingly that they waited until I left to grant us what we've been agitating for 7 years. But, you know, these things happen within their own time. And to Dr. Douglas's credit, he did extend thanks for the work that had preceded him, because I believe he understood that that work had been done, and so this was the position. But more specifically to your point about Africa, I believe that we can benefit from a greater engagement with Africa. I have said in the cabinet when I was a member, and I say it now again publicly, that we are being foolish. I know it's strong language, but it is language that I would use. We are being foolish in the Caribbean by continuing to look northwards, continuing to look towards the United States, continuing to look towards Canada, continuing to look towards Europe, when they themselves are looking to Africa. So how odd is it that we as black people who are of Africa are looking north when north is looking south? Because all of them are now looking to see how they can engage in a greater way with Africa. You look at a country like Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, has some of the largest deposits of minerals that the world now needs. Coltan, all of these minerals for our cell phones, all of the chips that are manufactured. And we see China rushing in. We see France, you realize now in the Sahel region, where you have Niger, Burkina Faso, and some other country, Mali, I think, have told France that they must leave, and they're now broken with ECOWAS because they want to have their own affiliation. Africa is where it's happening. Congo has one of the youngest populations in the world. One of the youngest populations in the world. Africa on a whole has one of the youngest populations in the world. They have resources. They have youth that give vigor and vitality. And I often wonder, what are we doing in the Caribbean? What are we doing? Because we are always making trips to America, to Canada, and very rarely, in fact, the only prime minister that I've seen that has reached out in a significant way, it appears, to Africa is Mia Mottley, Prime Minister Mottley of Barbados. I've seen her in Kenya. I've seen her in Ghana. We have not been reaching out in the way. I had a very moving experience in Senegal. I went to a place called Gorée Island. And Gorée Island, there was a dungeon where our forefathers were kept before they were shipped off to the Atlantic. And there was this famous door of no return. Once they went through that door and onto the ship, they never came back. And for me, it was a deeply spiritual. You couldn't help it. The guide was there, but there was something, almost like there was a spirit moving in that place that you could not help but feel and hear and sense the level of misery that our people would have endured in those dungeons before they came here. Caribbean people must understand that only the strongest survive that journey, you know. Because people were captured inland, taken to the coast, kept in dungeons, put on ships, sailed across, and this wasn't a luxury liner. They were shackled in the bowels of ships, sailed across the Atlantic to come here. Only the strongest survive. And what does that tell us? That we come from a bloodline that is the strongest that Africa had to offer. But we have not been willing, it appears, to engage with Africa. I recall some time ago when Dr. Tedros, it was, I believe he's of Ethiopia, was vying to be head of the WHO. And I recall the testy meeting that we had at the CARICOM level about who would support Tedros. And there was some Caribbean country, don't want he. Are you going with Africa? Let us go. because there were countries from the West that were also vying. And I had to speak up. I said, but let us throw our support with Ethiopia. And I have been an advocate, and I continue to be an advocate, that St. Kitts and Nevis should have an embassy in Addis Ababa, in Ethiopia. I have said so. Ethiopia is the seat of the African Union. The African Union, as you say, is 54 members strong. Could you imagine if those 54 countries of Africa were to be able to pool their diplomatic weight with the 13 countries of CARICOM at the UN? That gives us nearly 60 countries, nigh 1/3 of the members of the UN. Could you imagine if Africa and the Caribbean voted as a bloc? That on important issues, they know that they have to deal with Caribbean and Africa. It is a win-win-win situation. But for whatever reason, we have not followed up. And I think it's a mistake. Now, by way of self-defense, let me say that I did try my very best to engage with Africa. If you look at the 7 years, we developed diplomatic relations with a large number of African countries that we didn't have before. And we developed visa waiver arrangements with a large number that we didn't have before. So I can remember countries like Mozambique, Kenya, Senegal, a number of countries. I did, my last trip I recall as foreign minister, I was in Serbia, and I was able to develop relations with countries like Sao Tome and Principe, small African countries. Niger, I believe, we had relations with. Burkina Faso, we developed relations with. So the truth is that it was an ongoing effort. I would like to see that effort sustained. And I'm not saying anything here publicly that I have not suggested privately to the new foreign minister, because we had a very well-oiled machinery. From the office in New York, there's a young lady there called Ghislaine Williams, who was excellent at engaging with her counterparts, particularly in the African embassies, to try and get visa waiver arrangements. We also had in London our High Commissioner Kevin Isaac, Dr. Isaac, excellent at getting these things done. And so I think that it's an important initiative. From Taiwan, we were able to get Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland, I think, now known as Eswatini, visa waiver. All of these are countries in Africa that we were able to cement relations with. Sierra Leone, Zambia, the Gambia, all of these we would have done during my tenure. I believe, Mr. Hanley, that more effort is needed, concentrated effort is needed. In fact, I believe that what we need at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in St. Kitts and Nevis now, and if we don't want to do it at the level of St. Kitts and Nevis, then certainly at the CARICOM level, we need a desk, a unit that is specifically just about Africa and promoting our interests with Africa. One of the things that moved me, again, about Senegal, and I will end here, is that when I was there, I attended a reception, and a chap who was a former foreign minister of Senegal embraced me. First time I'm meeting him. And he said, my brother. And I said to him, why do you call me your brother? And he said, but we are brothers. He said that the Caribbean is part of the 6th region of Africa, which is their diaspora. And that Africa, in fact, recognizes us as part of them. Because, as you know, Africa has 5 regions: East, West, North, South, and Central. And so the diaspora is the 6th region of Africa. And he greeted me with a hug as his brother because he said, I am from Africa. And that meant a lot to me because I'd never been to Africa before. And here was a man greeting me as being his brother and telling me that I'm part of Africa. So I do believe that we need to do more. We need to have more of Africa taught in our schools. The history of Africa did not begin with slavery. Civilizations in Africa that we need to learn about, the wealth that Africa would have generated, the level of intellectual capacity. To this day, Mr. Hanley, they can't figure out how the pyramids of Egypt were constructed. To this day. This was all technology and techniques developed by Africans. And yet we, who are of Africa, continue to look to Europe. When, as I said, Europe is looking to Africa. So we have, I think, a reorientation that needs to happen. And the Caribbean needs to wake up to the reality that Africa and our relationship with Africa is where our future lies. Are there any more questions for me?
Okay, Hewlett, Department of Information. I'm asking this question on behalf of ZIZ. What is the status of the works at the Nevis Performing Arts Center, the cost and anticipated timeline of those renovations? Also, what is the Ministry of Tourism and the Nevis Tourism Authority currently doing to continue to attract ships to the island? Thank you.
The works at NEPAC, in fact, just this morning I signed off on the works on the roof, that those be undertaken. And we would anticipate that those works will be completed in time for Culturama. That is the date, so July. We have had some issues where that roof has leaked from the time that NEPAC was done. And so we are having now to redo the entire roof at quite a cost. I believe the estimate that I saw was just under $400,000 just to do that. So it's a significant cost for us. We also have had some issues with the electrical and some issues with the air conditioning. Certainly the electrical, those problems as well have existed since the inception. So we're trying to resolve those. Those would be additional costs. I'm anticipating that the overall project should be about $1 million just to get NEPAC back in good order. But we anticipate doing so. We have a pretty significant conference that's happening here as well, an international conference, and they need the use of NEPAC. So we expect to be able to do that. What are we doing to attract more crews? I believe I've said it often that cruise is not a main focus for our tourism thrust. We are focused on our hotels and getting heads in beds. Where we can attract cruise passengers, our policy is to treat cruise as a portal, as a gateway. Our hope would be, for example, that the people who came here on the Azura, that they would have come, the captain would have played golf, they would have done golf, they would have done their tours, and they say, you know what, we want to come back to this island with our families to spend some time at one of our hotels. That's how we treat cruise. Other jurisdictions see cruise as an end in itself, meaning let's get as many passengers as we can because that's where we make our money. Nevis has just had a different approach to it. So when we go out, we do talk to small cruise ships, we do talk to the higher end ships, and the objective, we hope, is for them to visit on a cruise and then come back to stay with us in our hotels, because that's where we feel the island makes the most money from the tourism industry, is to have people staying at our resorts, at our villas, at our guest houses. That's where we think we do best.
Just a follow-up question. Is there any program or policy in place to assist tourism stakeholders here to market what they have available, so that we have the cruise industry that's big in St. Kitts, where you see sometimes tourists would come over to Nevis for tours and what's not, but a lot of it is through one portal. So can they maybe learn how to be taught how to market their individual tours so that they can have bookings directly from the ship and that money goes directly into their hands?
So we have nothing in place at the moment, but it is something that is worthwhile looking at. We have one particular business here, Lime, who has done, which has done quite well. Mr. Randy Jeffers has created quite a stir and created, a niche for himself by catering. And when the cruise ships come into St. Kitts, they charter over, and he takes care of them over here. There is room, in my view, for others to engage in that, but we have no particular program where, as you say, to teach people how to do it. So it might be something that we would need to engage in, but we have not done so yet. But I'll certainly take that on advisement and see whether or not that is something that we can engage in as a Ministry of Tourism on Nevis. Mr. Bart?
Good morning, Premier.
Good morning to you.
Last year, you mentioned that the company called BEAD was supposed to drill some wells on Nevis. They had not delivered. And I think you said that you had paid, or the Nevis Island Administration had paid about $12 million to BEAD?
No. We paid to BEAD, the deposit under that agreement was $760,000 US was the deposit, wish I had $12 million, Mr.
Okay.
Bart. No, we're close.
Well,
The overall contract was $2 million US.
2 million US.
And we paid 760,000 US
Okay.
as a down payment.
All right. Now, the question is then, you indicated that the matter is being taken to court.
Yes.
What is the Nevis Island administration seeking? Is it seeking to have BEAD deliver on its contract, or are you seeking to get the money back?
Okay. So, fair question. Is that the only question
No,
you have? Okay, so let me just get your question, then I'll respond.
Okay. The other question relates to the idea of supporting the redevelopment of the Vance Armour International Airport. Now, just last night, you yourself said that the Four Seasons was basically a game changer on the island of Nevis.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you redevelop the Vance Armour International Airport, you have competition from Antigua, from St. Kitts, from St. Martin. How do you propose to generate more travel into Nevis, into the Vance Armour International Airport? Do you see, for example, another name brand resort being helpful in generating the kind of traffic that you need to support these and sustain the operations of the new redeveloped airport? That's my second question. And thirdly, just to get an update with regards to the discussions between the federal government and the Nevis administration in relation to the sharing of revenues coming from the CBI and other issues related to the enhanced collaboration or relations between Nevis and on St. Kitts. Right. Those are my three.
The last question is perhaps the easiest for me because I addressed it earlier to indicate that the Prime Minister and I would have spoken about a week and a half ago on that matter. He advises that the analysis that was being undertaken is almost done, and I did say that I would defer to him to make a public statement on that when that becomes available. So I wouldn't want to get into that at this point in terms of the CBI and the fair share arrangement that we've advocated for. But the last that he told me is that that work is nearing its completion. So I anticipate that we'll be in a position to speak to that shortly. Other areas of collaboration, I would say that the collaboration has been quite good thus far. We have had opportunities on geothermal, for example, where the Prime Minister led a delegation to Saudi Arabia for the first CARICOM Saudi summit, and he asked me to send someone to be a part of that delegation from the NIA specifically to speak to the Saudis about geothermal. So I thought those are unprecedented developments. Those have never happened in the history of our country before. So we have to point to them and say, well, those are things that it's a new approach, let us put it, to collaboration between St. Kitts and Nevis and between the NIA and the federal government. So we have done that. The Prime Minister himself would have said publicly, as I would have, that I would have gone to London on personal business, and while there he asked me to intervene with some parliamentarians in the UK on issues. This was surrounding the time when the UK had imposed visa restrictions on Dominica, and there were some concerns, and I was able to meet and to report back both to him and to the foreign minister. So again, areas of collaboration which were hitherto unknown, because I'm the leader of the opposition and I'm in London meeting, and he felt confident enough that he could ask me to do that for him, and he would have reported on that. So I think that generally speaking, there's a high degree of collaboration. Could it be better? Yes. We feel that there's still an absence of sharing of information in a timely way, but I think a lot of that has more to do with the technocrats and the people at the ministerial level than it does with those at the ministers themselves. Because the ministry level, I said ministerial, forgive me, those at the ministry level, meaning the permanent secretaries and heads of department, etc. I think people have grown accustomed to doing things in a particular way. So a lot of the departments in Nevis still complain that they get last-minute notification of things, last-minute information, a scholarship deadline, and we get it just a couple of days before, which makes it difficult, if not impossible, for us to mobilize over here. So those are some of the things in terms of the day-to-day workings of that collaboration. which I think still needs some work. But I think at the highest level, I can't complain. I think that the collaboration has been excellent thus far, and I'm quite happy with that at this stage. BEAD. Well, let me leave BEAD for last, if you don't mind, and I'll deal with your second question now that has to do with the Van Sam International Airport. You said with competition close by. You recall, Mr. Bart, that I tried to point out to the public that it was not our intention to compete necessarily with RLB or with Antigua or with St. Martin. In fact, when we looked at the option of doing a full-fledged international airport, the numbers were close to $100 million US, which was well outside our capacity. And so we went to Plan B, and Plan B basically is to develop what we're calling a private jet facility at the airport there, which will also be good enough to cater to the regional traffic, the Inter-Caribbeans and the LIATs. Well, the LIAT is no more. The Inter-Caribbeans and the, what's it going to sing? It used to come to Nevis, Silver Airways, and those types of airlines. But also to cater to a particular type of aircraft that American and some of the carriers are using for regional travel, something that they call a regional jet. It's an Embraer 145, I think it is, and it holds, generally, it's configured between 70 and 90 passengers. So it's not the wide-body jets that will come into RLB. Nevis is not, and even after the completion, will not be able to accommodate those. So we are not over here saying, American, come to Nevis instead of St. Kitts, or come to Nevis instead of Antigua. No. We are saying that we can cater to the smaller Embraer-type jets, which are regional. Those are the ones that, for example, American is now using into Anguilla, and we're told into Dominica from Miami. And we're saying that we want to be a home for the private jets. During the winter months, when our season is at its height, if you see Juliana Airport in St. Martin, or you see RLB in St. Kitts, there are quite a large number of private jets parked there. Our research, however, tells us that the people from those private jets are not in St. Kitts or in St. Martin. Those airports are, to some extent, being used as a parking lot because they have parked there because that's what's available. But those people are actually in Nevis, they're in St. Bart's, they're in Anguilla. Anguilla is doing exactly what we are trying to do, building out their infrastructure where they can now say, listen, if you're a private jet owner, come into Anguilla, fly to Anguilla, park in Anguilla, be refueled in Anguilla, pay your fees in Anguilla, have your hangar in Anguilla, do everything in Anguilla. So Anguilla now will capture what it is currently losing to nearby airport in St. Martin. We are seeing a market for that same thing. So in a way, we're not trying to compete as much as we're trying to complement the services already available in the country. So you're not going to see a British Airways landing in Nevis. We're not trying to attract, we can't. We don't have the capacity. We don't have the physical capacity to accommodate. The infrastructure would not be able to accommodate that. But we are hopeful that by next Christmas, if we can get this going as we plan to get it going, you will be seeing the private jets parked here. A lot of the homeowners, for example, in Nevis actually have private jets. Some of them do come into Nevis already on their private jets. That's why you have occasionally jets landing over there. But most of them say to us that because of insurance and other reasons, they have to land elsewhere and park elsewhere. Now, part of what we lose out as well is that a lot of the crew on those private jets, they as well are staying elsewhere. So if the passengers are in St. Bart's or in whatever, the crew might be someplace else, right? So we're trying to cater to that because that is the level at which Nevis is pitching its market in terms of our tourism. We are high-end, high yield, low impact. That's our model for tourism. It goes back to the question about cruise that was asked, that our model is high-end, high yield, low impact. We prefer to have 100 guests coming to Nevis paying $1,000 a night than to have 1,000 guests coming paying $100 a night. And think about it. I know some people say the math is the same, but it's actually not. Our model is a different model. And so that's what we're trying to cater to. Bede. The Bede situation has been a complex situation. Bede, as we said in 2017, we would have paid Bede US $760,000 as a down payment on 3 wells, total cost of $2 million US. And Bede didn't deliver, in our opinion. We tried to engage with them, that didn't go anywhere. We eventually went to court to try to recover. Not all, but some, because under the contract we were not able to recover all of the monies that we had paid them. And Bede did not respond. We in fact had a default judgment against Bede for that amount. I will say publicly that since all that, Bede re-entered the Federation and it has done successful drilling in Keon, in St. Kitts. And Bede has indicated an interest in coming back to Nevis to complete the drilling that they should have done in 2017 in Nevis. And we have, as a cabinet, taken the decision that we will at least give them an opportunity to advise us whether they're in a position to now complete that contract. That is separate and apart to the bidding process that is complete, because we have evaluated those bids and we have looked at them with a view to determining what might offer the best value for money. But even as we were doing that, Bede approached and said, hey, we know we've had these problems, but we're now finished with what we're doing on St. Kitts, and we are minded to come back to Nevis to finish what we ought to have done 7 years ago. And so we are having that conversation with them. Bearing in mind, as I say, that they're already holding a significant sum of money from the NIA. We have a default judgment, but that default judgment has not been satisfied. And so we are saying, can we do a reset and engage with them? But we are now waiting on them to advise us as to what they can do and what they propose they can deliver for the people of Nevis. So that is where we are insofar as Bede is concerned at this point. Our objective as a government, Mr. Barth, is to get more water available to the people of Nevis. That is our objective. And however we can get to that objective, that is where we want to go. So we're looking at what would be the most cost-effective and time-effective way to get us additional water into our system. Remember that in Nevis we have invested upwards of 40 million EC dollars over the course of the last decade or so in upgrading our infrastructure in terms of distribution and storage. We are now prepared to spend money to upgrade in terms of our availability of water. So we have bigger tanks and better tanks. We have the polyurethane pipes. We've replaced all the old pipes. Nowhere in Nevis now would have any low water pressure. We've solved all of those problems. We, in fact, I believe I can say with some confidence, have one of the best water distribution systems in the region. But we now need additional water. And that was the objective of this government in 2017 when we signed the deal with Bede, was to get that additional water. Bede did not deliver. And so we were working on that and finding ourselves now, 7 years later, in some difficulty in terms of water. Well, it is our hope that we will hear what they have to say in terms of whether they can now deliver on that contract that they would have had some 7 years ago. So that is where we currently are in that situation. Either way, whether with Bede or without Bede, we anticipate mobilizing very quickly. In fact, I'm thinking that we should be in a position to mobilize in the month of March in relation to drilling. It is our ambition to have at least one well providing us with water by the time we get around to the summer months this year. And so that is the objective. Yes.
Now, you did indicate that the Nevis Island Administration, Ministry of Tourism, is not competing in terms of the airport infrastructure with the other islands close by. But what about the component of sustainability, traffic? So what do you think will help to drive additional traffic into Nevis based on the model that you have described? Would new hotels, resort, name brand type things be helpful?
Yes.
Or do you have any other plans in place?
Yes. So I think I neglected to answer that part of your question, Mr. Barth. Thanks for reminding me. You're absolutely correct. We need, I believe, an additional one, maybe two significant branded properties on this island. I think will help drive traffic. The Four Seasons is quite enamored with the idea of this expansion of the airport, because from time to time they also have group travel, and those groups will charter. So if they have a group of 200, 2 charters out of Miami landing directly at Vance Amory International would suit them as well. So there is an opportunity, I think, for that group business, 1, small groups that is, and 2, having additional hotel stock, but as you say, boutique branded. That's Nevis's model. So we are also out there actively having those conversations about people coming in and doing developments here of that quality and that kind that we feel will fit within the model that is Nevis. Nevis doesn't have the size or the space to allow it to be all things to all people. We're not a Jamaica where you could have mass tourism in one end and high-end tourism in another. Here on the island, we really can only have one or the other, and we've opted for the high end. That's what we want to do. So you're absolutely correct, and we're having those conversations. I'm always loath to make announcements because so many announcements in the past have come to naught. And so I'm leaving that simply to say we're having those conversations, and we are optimistic that we'll get something done. But we are insistent when we have those conversations that it has to be something that is branded at a particular level. 4 Seasons and above is what we are looking at for Nevis. Any other questions for me? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Happy leap year. I hope that you all go out to church now and say a prayer. You don't have to be in church to say a prayer. So say a prayer. Today is the National Day of Prayer, and I wish you all the very best to you and your families, and hope to see you tonight at this service here in Nevis, for those of you who are from Nevis, here in Nevis at the New Testament Church of God in Bath Village. Thank you, and I look forward and hope to see you next month for our monthly press conference. Thank you very much.